Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of Carpe Datum Prescriptions. My name is Shirish Netke, and I have with me right now Jim Hemingway from Wells Fargo Bank. And the topic of today is the medium, the message, and the data scientist. Now, Jim, welcome to our program for this month.
Well, thanks, Sharish. Good morning, and good morning to the audience. I'm happy to be here and glad to be talking about visualization.
Great, great. Now, Jim, we've been talking about the medium, the message for a very long time, and we've now inserted the term data scientist along with the medium and the message. Now, tell me, how do those three things come together? I mean, you're a data scientist, and you've been dealing with messaging, and you've been dealing with visualization for a long time. So, can you tell us for the audience how do these three things come together?
I think they come together in my mind that as good as the tools are, and as much as the technology is advancing, it takes people in the end that are thinking up new ways to use the tools and using them to the full extent to get the message out.
So what it means is you have to have technology along with and people to be able to get the message out or to visualize something.
Right.
Okay, great. So let me ask some questions. I mean, we've been talking about this for many years now. I mean, it's been 20 years or 30 years since people have been talking about some form of visualization. Can you tell us a little bit about how this historically evolved in the business area or with business users?
Yeah, let's slide forward here one. Sure. So here I've got some of the generations of analytical reporting as I see them. Back starting from the left, way back when in the 70s and earlier, we had green bar reports. They were generated by mainframe.
Yeah.
We had dedicated teams of people running kind of standardized reports.
Yep.
In the 80s, Lotus came out with spreadsheets.
Yeah, and as I said, a lot of people are still using those things.
They are.
Spreadsheets galore. Yeah.
And you had some charting then. You got
Uh-huh.
some charting where the user could kind of just define for himself what kind of chart he wanted, what message he wanted to send. Later in the 80s, they started getting crosstabs. I remember when Excel came out with crosstabs. It was kind of neat. It allowed you to do some quick segmentation and group some things together. And then in the late 90s, that was kind of when I got into this. Excel 97 had the ability to link via ODBC to external data
Right.
sources.
Right.
And you got away from row limits, and you could go to fairly large tables within reason, and do the same thing, but now access sort of the system of record data sources, if you will,
Sure.
using some good presentation layer tools. And then maybe by the middle of the last decade, you started getting some of these new visualization tools. Tableau is what we use internally. ClickView's out there, Spotfire's out there, Cognos is out there, with varying degrees of visuality. But the tools are much better. It's basically the ease with which you can create your own story with graphs and convey a message.
So do you think these tools allow you to do stuff which was not possible to do before, or just makes you do stuff faster, better than what you were doing before?
It's some of both. Some of you could do many things with pivot tables and ODBC. There are some things that we can do today, and we can get to that a little later. If you want to go, let's go forward one more. Sure. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so here's something that a project we did a while ago in Wells Fargo, and this this was an internal process in one of our lending areas.
Okay.
Where this is plotting a process failure rate, where a high number is bad.
Okay.
And
High is bad, low is good. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
Easy to understand.
this is really this is now what I call these visual multiple regressions.
Okay.
And so, in the old days, could you have done this with a pivot table?
Well, after looking at a lot of numbers and going
Yes.
blind in both eyes, you could
Exactly.
probably come to the same conclusion. Yeah.
Exactly, but it would have taken a long, long time.
Yeah.
And with the new tools, you can do this rather quickly once you get comfortable with them and familiar with their capabilities. In this case, you've got the left and right sides of the screen, the green shaded portion and the white shaded portion.
Right.
So,
Right.
so there's several variables going on here. The green and the white tells you the customer state, if you will. Some characteristics that we came up that we defined about the customer that really predicted this failure rate. We can't change that. the different colored lines, the green and the red line, that is something that we can change, or we can have some control
And what
over.
do those correspond to?
So the green line is where we basically had an idea ahead of time whether we were meeting the customer expectation on terms.
Ah, okay. So you
And
can take action on that. Yeah.
yes, we can change that to some degree, not
Okay.
not without limitation, but to some degree.
Right.
And again, the red case, we were far from their expectations,
Aha.
and you can see that made the process failure rate higher.
Mhm.
Along the x-axis here that I've got bracketed off, those were some other mostly internal factors.
Mhm.
You can see I've got BCF1 and 2. Those were bank control factors. Those were
Right.
some additions to our process that we had made in the last several years that we kind of knew had raised the level of this failure rate, if you will.
Mhm.
And they were under our control to some degree too. Now they were instituted for reasons, although some of the impacts of it didn't come to light until a while later.
Right.
But you look at it like this, and you think, so some things we can change. We can easily see the impact of repealing, bank control factor 1 here.
Right.
And we'd slide back down the line, maybe to what we call a happy path.
Okay.
And so we can get an idea. Just if you send this image in a PowerPoint slide out to a group of people, you can see everybody can see for themselves what the impact on the failure rate is going to be. Whereas we said if we did this in a pivot table, we'd be looking at pages and pages of crosstabs and not knowing, not being able to really get the message out of it.
So you're saying here the picture is worth 1,000 words and it's probably worth 1,000,000 numbers.
Yeah,
right.
it is. Exactly.
Because there's so many digits and
that's right.
just to get this message across. Okay.
It would be very difficult to do this with pivot tables. Now you could have done it. Move forward to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So I showed something like this at the Tableau conference last November.
Uh-huh.
And for that audience, I wanted to convey, that a lot of people might have had a complaint that, well, this looks nice and it's pretty and it's worth 1,000 words and it's easy to convey the message, but how rigorous is it?
Right.
So I took the same data, and we've got Enterprise Miner licenses here, so ran the same data through Enterprise Miner with the same variables that are being plotted on in the Tableau visualization. And you can see the output, and the arrow there is basically confirming, and the variables and some of the numbers there are confirming what you see with your eyes.
Right.
That these variables are statistically significant, and while Tableau is not giving you that output exactly, it's certainly visually telling you what seems to matter to this process. And that's and for a lot of business users, this is a much more palatable image to convey and much easier for folks at all levels to understand.
So, I mean, there are some people who sort of like the stuff at the bottom, and some people at the bottom. So it's up to their preferences what they want to do.
They could. I mean, if you had a group, if you had people who were very, very modeling oriented and very statistically savvy, and they wanted the rigor, if you will,
right,
you could show them the little the pasted in image in the lower right hand corner of the table.
Right.
But for most users, I would guess the picture is much more effective.
So now, was this basically a productivity play in terms of increase the productivity of your team to do things faster and better, or did it actually help you make better decisions? I mean, did it have a tangible impact on how we decided things and the quality of your decisions?
Well, I can tell you the productivity goes up.
Yeah.
Do we come to the same decisions? I would say that in most cases you do. There are some things that you can simply do. We said, well, you couldn't have really accomplished this using simple tools, and you couldn't have.
Right.
I think you can, whether you can do qualitatively different things in the end, if you have no constraints on what tools you can use, the answer is no. But can you, in the real world constraints of time and tools, are you more productive and more capable? Absolutely. And it's basically it's an end-to-end productivity enhancer.
Right. So, and I guess it also helps in communicating your decision or explaining your decision to different people. So there are a lot of stakeholders in it. I guess every stakeholder gets to see the basis of the decision as opposed to saying, well, it's a black box or something.
Well, if we showed them the table here from out of SAS,
yeah,
people would say, "What is this? I don't understand this. What does this mean?"
That's right.
But if you show them the picture there, and you say, "Hey, here's where we move people from this node to this node," everybody kind of understands that and can see that with their own eyes.
Great. Now, from your point of view, I mean, you've been doing this for a while in different ways. Now, has there been any kind of stark lessons that you've learned from this, or are there things that you do differently if you had known this like 10 years ago, if you had this available before?
I think one thing we've learned is that let's move forward. Let's move forward maybe to the lessons learned. Yeah, sure. You can get remarkably quick answers if you've got data sources set up and you've got a reporting infrastructure in place. You can get remarkably quick answers to relatively complicated questions.
Okay.
Which,
Which again we could not do before.
you could not do before.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the new tools do that is qualitatively different, for example, with pivot tables, you can create custom metrics if you want.
Right.
If you have got a column of pricing and prices or revenue and a column of quantity, you can calculate an average revenue. But what you can't do is easily group along several different dimensions and group, make a category of, well, I want, shoe sales in the Northeast combined with salsa sales in the Southwest.
Yeah, some kind of ad hoc, like diapers and beer and whatever, Pop Tarts and whatever we talked about.
Which
you can do that kind of
you
stuff.
can do dimensional,
Yeah.
these calculated fields and looking at the grouping techniques. You can do grouping of dimensions now. The pivot tables does not allow you to do that.
Okay.
And in the past, you would have had to have a dedicated team creating these roll-ups and these aggregated dimensions. And sure enough, you could with programming teams do that.
With statisticians and a lot of people there. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's an iteration to it.
Right.
And if you discovered something on the fly that you wanted to build into your data for later, you have to go back and engage in a requirements process with them. Could you please add a grouping that consists of this to our table, and then now we can report on it and analyze it.
Right.
But with these tools, that you don't need to do that. You can have record level kind of system of record data, not aggregated in any way, and with some of the extract data extractability and the ability to work with very large files, you can create that on the fly and iterate yourself. And the data scientist iterates themselves rather than having to work back with an MIS team.
Yeah, I noticed here that you say that the process hasn't changed, but the speed at which it gets done that makes a big difference.
Yes. Yeah. So you go from hypothesis, you test the data out yourself,
right?
Come to conclusions, and then iterate on that.
Right.
When in the past, you could have maybe, I saw something. Hey, could you guys get around to changing these fields and give me this new aggregate field? Okay, and they'll put you in their queue, and you have to wait. And maybe if they're quick, in a couple of weeks you'll get it. But now you can have it immediately.
Okay.
And that's what's different. I had the military analogy. And here's where the scientist comes in. So the scientist is the soldier, if you will.
In modern combat.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the things that make a good soldier are the same as they've always been.
Yeah.
Bravery, motivation, training.
Yeah, you still need that stuff.
You still need that stuff. Yeah. But if you have all that, you're much more effective with modern weapons than you would have been with a musket.
Okay. Yeah, that I can see where this thing would make a big difference. Now you mentioned something about the cool factor. I mean, a lot of visualization vendors talk about all kinds of like fancy graphs and all that kind of stuff, and it's got a lot of appeal to it, eye candy as people call it. How important is that in a business environment? Is that like the be all and end all of everything, or does it have a lot of value, or is there some is that just like like superficial value, or is there any business value to that?
I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask me, there are some there's some of the graphing types available in Tableau that are complicated, and you have to get used to them.
Right.
But for a person who does get used to it and gets kind of accustomed to thinking in that way and is familiar with the tools and what the different dimensions show you, then it does have value. Because you can see things simultaneously that may not be easy to see other ways. For a lot of end users, though, a lot of executive management and a lot of end users, I made the joke here about just give me the expletive number.
Yeah.
Lots of people, depending on where you are in the organization and what you're being measured on, have very simple needs, and for them, they want the number. They want to know that their process failure rate was 17% this month. Not, well, does it vary by this or does it vary by that? That's sort of beyond their.
They want very simple answers. Yeah.
Yes, that's beyond their purview at the moment. And for those people, cool is you're wasting the cool on them, and you have to cater, you have to tailor what you're giving to them and give them what they want. But I think for the data science people and the people, the power users and people creating the content, the cool is cool and does help you kind of think about problems and solve them in different ways.
So does it give you insights which you would have otherwise missed in a situation like this, or is it more of like the coolness? It just gives them like different ways to think about stuff.
I think again, it's one of those. Could you have done it the old without the cool?
Right.
Yes.
Yes, you could.
But does it sometimes? Are there maybe niche applications where the cool and that allows you to do something in a very compact way? I think yes, also.
So let me ask you this, Wayne. You've been, I guess, you're kind of pioneer in the area because you've done a lot of work in it, right, in visualization right from the beginning. How did you justify initially the expense of putting money down something like this
Well,
and
there's
making it work. Is it was it hard or was it easy? Or it's never easy. I know that.
Well, the reality is, well, I mean, again, not endorsing just simply one product, but the price of the tools is not that expensive.
Okay.
I mean, if you have a team of, a Tableau license is a couple $1,000
Mhm.
one time, and then there's some ongoing maintenance, and I don't know about Spotfire and the others.
Mm.
Um,
It'd be similar. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, is that an exorbitant amount of money to spend to enhance the productivity of an analytical group?
Hmm.
Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, we, like we said, we've gone over the what you can do and how much it enhances your productivity. I mean, if it costs me $100 a month to have an internet connection, would that be a worthwhile investment for the company? I think it would.
Yeah.
Some of these tools merely become the minimum to get into the game of business with productivity. And if you choose not to spend it, fine, you can. But that's a penny wise and pound foolish decision, I think.
Yeah. So it wasn't very hard from your point of view to justify or to even think about why spending the money on something.
Yes.
Now, what about in terms of training of the people, the soldiers who do this stuff? Do you need a different kind of soldier for modern warfare than you would, let's say, would have hired, let's say, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
To some degree, I think there is. I heard a guy at the Tableau conference say that
Hmm.
that they used to have a lot of Excel. They used to do the reporting with Excel and pivot tables and sending stuff out, and they had a lot of VBA macros, and so they had that need. But then they went to Tableau Server, and now between what the customers want to see and what Tableau can do, they need people who can kind of do the visualization process more.
Hmm.
So it's changed what kind of people they like to hire. And I mean, I think even what I've seen internally here at Wells, some people really take to it, and some people don't.
Oh, okay.
Some people still do like just new tools are hard for people to kind of use.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Excel when Excel 2010 came out,
Hmm.
some of the menus have changed, and there's a learning curve. And people who have learned how to do things in a certain way may not want to make the transition as quickly. But I think that there definitely is are people who are more open to it and tend to be more effective with it. And you need to find those people if you're going to make full use of it.
So, do you need to hire artists as well as technologists in this stuff, or is that another missing link in your repertoire of skills?
Not yet,
Not yet. Okay.
not
Okay.
yet. But because I think you need, the tools enable you to do so many things
Hmm.
that you have to be grounded enough in the basic disciplines of of data, how databases work and how economic relationships work and what variables are likely to be interesting and not, and how to create metrics that are meaningful. So you're not totally getting away from the science side of it,
Hmm.
but you need, but you definitely there's maybe just a new twist now that it's so important. And the difference between a good presentation of something and a bad presentation, even with the same tool,
Hmm.
can be quite large.
Okay. So actually, there are a couple of questions that we have. I guess of people who've been uh, who submitted questions in the past. One of the questions is, if you've never done visualization before, what would be a good point to start? Is there something? Is there a starting point that we should use, or is there a specific tool that we should be working on? Or considering that companies who've never looked at visualization as a part of the decision making before, what would you recommend to them?
Well, I think they should go out and look at the different vendors available. Try out the tools. I mean, most of them are available on a trial basis. And take some of your existing, take a user in your organization who's, kind of an early adopter and is willing to try it and show some enthusiasm, and let them try out the different tools. And initially, try to replicate, probably the easiest place to start is just to replicate some of your existing reporting.
Hmm.
But then, if the person's a good power user, they'll quickly see some new uses for it. And it's just an iterative process. You create some reports,
Hmm.
you migrate some of your existing reports, you see new uses for the tools, and I would say get a trial copy and turn a few people who are early adopters loose with it, and expect them to and then ask them, hey, what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's in terms of the user community. Actually, another question in that same context is a sort of variation of that is that different functional areas look at data differently, but they have different expectations. So we talk about the CMO having a different requirement than the than the CEO. CEO may want like different would look at the same data from a different point of view than the CMO would. How how important has that been in the way you've designed your let's say your sheets or your tools or the visualization that you've come up with? Has it been different for different people?
It is. I mean, the higher in the organization material goes, generally, the more there's there's probably a little bit of a change in
Hmm.
to make it look more uniform and more consistent with some of the style guidelines. And Tableau doesn't always, we may need to simplify some things as they go way up the chain.
Hmm.
I think some of the more the more elaborate representations of and the cool we talk about is probably most prevalent at kind of the power user level.
Hmm.
The analysts and maybe the business managers who are analytical themselves.
Okay.
But when it gets up to the very top, I mean, sometimes for earnings day kind of announcements and stuff, you tend to people tend to want simpler than Tableau is capable of. Although certainly you can dumb it down enough
Hmm.
to
Make it easier for a lot of people, for a high volume of people to read.
yeah,
So it's actually the same data though, and
yeah,
the same tool. There are different ways of aggregating that to make it easier
and
for.
just making it look simpler and less busy sometimes.
Okay, great, great. Now, from your point of view, I mean, you've been using visualization for a while. You've said it's improved your productivity. You had to sort of change the way people are. Some people have adopted the tool better. Where do you see the future of this going? I mean, how do you think this will evolve in the future? How will visualization be? Will it become a more important part of a person's, I guess, tool set, or is it going to become new people? Will they have to learn this a little bit more than they have in the past?
I definitely think they'll have to learn it a little bit more. I mean,
Mm.
it's like this is the current tool. I mean, if you were on Wall Street or in a credit card company in the '80s, you had to
Hmm.
learn pivot tables, and you probably had to learn SAS.
Yeah.
And now, if you're in an equivalent role or in any analytical role, you've got to learn these kinds of tools.
Hmm.
I think where it's going is that they will be increasingly used. The difference people will come to appreciate um, okay representations of things versus great representations of things. I mean, 20 years ago, any cell phone was a big deal, but now the bar the raised so high by the iPhone functionality and the cool of swiping and eye
Hmm.
tracking and whatnot.
Hmm.
That the bar just gets raised for what the market expects, and likewise with these kinds of tools people will be expected to use them, and not that they're difficult to use,
Hmm.
but again, people like you said about to the are you recruiting artists? No, we're not recruiting artists,
Hmm.
but you need people with some eye for being able to convey who isn't just giving you the expletive number, who can
Right.
put it
Right.
in
Right.
context and show you the differences between the number here and the number there, and make more sense of a process.
Good. I think there's one last question we have before we wrap up is, um, if there's one piece of advice you would give to carpe diem members here, we call it the carpe diem prescription. What would that be? Because I mean, we have people here from banking, we have marketing people, we have the people. All of them are some from all the other big data analytics. But what would be your piece of advice to them?
Um, well, I think the tools are just wonderful enhancements to the data scientist's toolbox. You need to get good people, give them access to the tools, and be open to it as an organization. You need to have data availability. Uh, you know, when you talk to people in other industries, other companies, I think in my area here in Wells Fargo, we have a relatively democratic data process
Right.
where we can create our own
Data.
sandbox areas.
Yeah.
We can work with production data, but create our own views of that. Other organizations that I know are not always that way, and I think that's a key element that you need the people who have the tools and who are responsible for reporting on it to have a relatively relaxed process with which to be able to create new sort data sources and to modify it themselves.
Hmm.
Because even though you can do a lot of things with the tool, there's always a need to be able to go in to writing SQL code or writing SAS code to prepare a data set for use here. And so
So, in order to make sure you fix the data availability problem, spend some time on that before applying the tools.
yes,
Okay.
yes, and to sort of work out kinks and make sure that it's in a form that is useful for the problem at hand.
Okay.
I think that and openness to that some of the visualization insights. If you get more of them, some of
Mhm.
them are going to contradict
What
sacred.
you see from other sources. Yeah.
Yes, and
Okay.
internal sacred cows maybe in some cases,
Uh-huh.
and that if you want to be an analytically driven organization,
Hmm.
and we can all some of us are at relative at different points on that.
Different points of that. Yeah. Different points of
of the
evolution on
spectrum.
that. Yeah.
But in order to get more that way, you have to be open to letting people look at data and then acting on the conclusions, I think, or being willing to be open to the conclusions.
Great. That's all the time we have for today, Jim. Thank you very much for participating in this month's event, and wish you all the best in your future visualization efforts.
Well, thanks, Harish. I'm glad to be here today.
Okay. Thank you.